I've lived 1,000 lives. I've piloted 1,000 souls. I've killed and fought and died just for another role.
This is the Happy Jacks RPG podcast, a roundtable discussion that's a mix of friendship, humor, unbridled enthusiasm, and tabletop RPG topics sent in from around the world.
Just for another role.
I'm like, it's again.
Hello.
This again.
It sounds like I was trashing the show and not my presence.
Yeah, that's fine. All right. Welcome to season 31, episode 6 of the Happy Jacks RPG podcast. My name is Kimmy.
I'm Riley.
And I'm Bill.
Anybody go. Just anybody.
I'm not here all the time.
I
don't
know,
know
it's okay.
things. I don't
It's
know
hard to
things.
remember. I know.
We hit it on beats. It was
Yeah.
like there was the same pause. It was all good.
I'll add some sort of
Some gravitas to tonight's episode.
I'm Riley. Oh.
All right. In today's episode, Richard asks if mechanics and crunch can actually help new players. Adam from California, which is not the same as our Adam who's in the studio, different Adam from California, has advice
You know
about...
how we know it's not our items because it showed up for the show tonight.
Yeah.
Oh, damn.
It's the
Love
one
you
thing that
so
I will
much.
never let go.
Writes in with advice about running the One Ring, which is great. Thank you for that. And Burke wonders if he has done his players a disservice as a GM. So if you'd like to contribute a question or topic to the show, you can email us at happyjacksrpg@gmail.com. That's happyjacksrpg@gmail.com. And thank you, everyone who's been writing emails. We can always use more, but it's no longer a dire situation. So I appreciate all of you. Announcements. We have 2 new actual plays. One had their first session today. They did session 0 character creation a while back, and today was their first actual play session. So session 1, and that was Heaven on High, which is our City of Mist game that's playing at 2 p.m. Pacific time on Fridays.
Wow.
Because people from all over the place, and so it's very exciting there, and they're just amazing.
And
So-
East Coast viewers have no excuse now.
Yeah.
It's not that it's on too
We'll
late
watch it.
for you.
Yeah.
5 o'clock. Boom.
Yeah, and they were really awesome.
Let's turn the commute.
Yeah.
There's no commute. There's no commute.
No, it's fine.
There's no commuting in baseball.
But I was really impressed. Lloyd did an incredible job GMing. I knew that he would, and all the players are just great. So please check that out either live on Twitch or you can check it out later on YouTube and as a podcast. And then on Monday, which is very soon, I am starting my One Ring campaign.
That is the voice of the GM who's like, how many hours are left before the first session?
Yeah, I have some crunching to do because it's a crunchy system. But I'm excited, and we did session 0 character creation a bit ago last week, and it was amazing. And I'm so excited about the players and the characters and the world, and it's gonna be wild.
Which one is
gonna be
Sauron?
amazing. Oh, the one that is very boring for most of it, and then suddenly the fuck? Yeah, sorry. That was a Rings of Power swipe. Anyway, so those 2 things are happening. So it's very exciting. So check that out. And I think that's everything for updates right now. And if you are a Patreon, please go and fill out the little form that I posted again so that you can be listed in our thanks credits at the end of the shows. Many of you have not been doing that. So there's a whole lot more Patreons than get thanked. But we thank you anyway, even if your name's not listed. But do that. It's on the Patreon thing. Go just check it out. All right. Now, very exciting. It's the first show of December, which means we get to have a new indie designer of the month. So, our indie designer for December is someone I have loved and Twitter stalked for a really long time, and they're very kind to me when they're like, "Oh, I will reply to you," because I'm I fangirl a lot on them. So Nura Rose is the owner of Monkey Paws Games, and she's a Black, queer, trans, neurodivergent designer, and in her words, she's the quadrifecta. And you can find her work at monkeyspawgames.com, along with an amazing collection of indie games by other designers that she's curated and sells.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, she has a whole setup there, which is amazing. I've bought games there. A lot of really niche indie stuff that's hard to find in other places. And the game we're going to design, and the game we're going to feature this week, each week of the month, we're going to feature another game specifically designed by her, is Cannibal, which is a fully self-contained rules alternative for the D100 hammer system. That is John Geary's Sledgehammer, and then Christina Soundbush, which was our indie designer of last month's Bright Hammer. This is like the most fun thing about finding indie designers. Like I just go down the rabbit hole of like, here's one designer I love. Oh, and they're friends with this designer. Oh, and they're friends with this designer. So I just get to like.
That's like me on Mastodon right now, where I find a person that I because it's so hard to find people's instances that I just find my friends and then I see who they're following.
Yes.
And I look for names I recognize or people that seem cool.
Yeah.
And that's how I've definitely stalked your following list and
Totally.
stuff like that. So.
I did the same with yours. So anyway, so Cannibal is written by Nura and with cultural consulting by James Mendez Hodas. And it's a take on a post-warring states feudal Japan. And it's a TTRPG, but specifically the Japan depicted in movies, not like the historical one. So it like 47 Ronin and 7 Samurai. It like makes no attempt to be like historically accurate, but it's gritty, cinematic, and really stylized, which is amazing. Players wander through a post-warring states Japan looking for work, food, and purpose. And it really strongly emphasizes resource management, exploration, and the consequences of violence. So somebody dies, it's probably going to be a player. And unlike comparable samurai TTRPGs, which we will not name, not once is a Japanese word used in place of an English one, and there's not a single instance of the word honor anywhere in the system. And there are 2 versions of the game. There's Basic Cannibal, which is like much more simplified and improvisation focused. And then the newly released Expert Rules is part 1 of what will be 3 additional big supplements, and it gets like much deeper. And that will be the game that our Patreons are getting for free this month. So check that out. Very soon we'll be having a download link in the Patreon. So if you want to get in on that amazing indie RPG action, you can also join our Patreons at happyjacks.org/Patreon. And then to find her games and if you cannot wait and you want to buy it right now, you can go to monkeyspawgames.com and get her amazing stuff and learn more about her. I'm so excited.
I feel like that was a good segue into the next letter too. Like
Is it?
The idea of having like a basic rules and expert rules, and then you have this next letter.
I planned it that way.
I know you did. That's why you went, is
Totally.
it? When I asked you a question.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
I'm very smooth.
Yeah.
Super smooth.
Yeah, I've always said that about you.
Yes. Seamless in all ways. All right. They're all shaking their heads for podcast listeners.
But yeah, I whispered. I've never said that once about her. I'm not sure. I could pick
And
up
then
on
we
it
shook
on my
our
own.
heads left and right. I
Yeah.
feel like alt text now.
Yeah,
It's like,
that's exactly what it is. All right. I just did a whole bunch of talking, so somebody else should read this email.
All right.
Ready to go.
This first letter sounds like the beginning of Great Gatsby. Like some advice I've been turning over my head ever since. So I don't think I can do a good Nick impression, but I will try to just read this email like a human being. I had a thought today, and remember that you always say that you need more email. Now I'm giving it an accent. I did not mean to give it an
wow,
accent.
it's
And though
It's
I'm
because you said
generally
it-
a recluse who only lurks in social places, I thought I'd give this talking to people a go.
Yay.
I was listening to season 3, episode 2, so I was not on that episode.
No.
Where y'all were
It's
discussing
season 31,
All
not
right.
season 3.
Season 31, episode 2. Also, I think where y'all falls out of my British accent that I'm doing. Where y'all were discussing how you didn't like the direction that designers took Avatar Legends. I know you said then that you wanted to take some time to more thoroughly understand the rules and form more informed opinions, but I have heard from several sources that they have added a lot of additional systems and mechanics to Powered by the Apocalypse, and it brought to mind the contention that I have heard that the reason D&D is good for new players is that the increased number of rules give guide rails for newer players, highlighting the things that they can do rather than just saying that they can do anything. My question for you then is this. Do you think it is better to have more mechanics, more crunch to help new players solid options, help give new players solid options, and do you have any stories of newer players freezing up from decision paralysis when it comes to their turn, or alternatively looking at their character sheet, seeking a skill or ability, and having that result in a great role-playing moment? Thanks for the show. It's always informative and entertaining. Sincerely, Richard. P.S. Drink.
Huzzah!
PPS, I used Dekuma for my last campaign, and we all loved it. Kimmy, did you hear that? Richard
Amazing.
loves Dekuma. What's that come up? And I am just saying this for no reason. There's no connection between this podcast and that game.
None.
Not at all. Not at all,
No.
Richard. Not at all. And for the podcast listener, I'm pointing to both my eyes and then right at the camera. My answer to this question is, first of all, because I was on the episode we talked about good setting, disappointing rules, and then vice versa, and Avatar Legends came up in that conversation, which is why I thought it was the one that was the episode where I made fun of Jameson's game right to his face without realizing it.
I love that episode.
I think that this debate about crunch being good or bad for new players is such a your miles may vary conversation. I don't think there is. I think it's not a one size fits all conversation. I do think that, like, yes, part of why D&D is good for new players is because people who do need guide rails, it's there for it. But I also think D&D is good for new players because most people know how to play D&D if they're going to play role-playing games. And so you have a lot of people who can help you learn the game. It's kind of like poker being a card game everybody knows how to play because everybody knows someone who can teach them card games. I'm like, there's so much material available for D&D that if you get lost, there's a lot of guides to do it. But yeah, I have found, as someone who's, I've always played in pretty rules-heavy games from starting out. I started out in World of Darkness, which was a pretty rules-heavy system. And I will say that back when I was a teenager, the game whose setting I loved the most, but whose system I got frustrated with, was Mage the Ascension, because mages at the time, especially their magic system, was so like, I don't know, figure out what fate does in this situation. You're like, I don't know. So, like, I think that there is definitely something to be said about, like, someone going, here's the list of spells that exist, and you can do them, and that's it. But I think PBTA can be very intimidating to some new players.
Yeah.
Whereas other new players will take to it like a fish to water if their goal is to come in and just tell improvised, stories with just a little bit of randomization to them. And so, yeah, I think it all depends on what people are looking for when they come in. So that's my answer to that question.
Yeah, some
Richard.
stuff to take into account is, like, what do they do right now? Like, if they are, like, a theater person, an improv actor, like, PBTA might be a better way to go with a little bit less. They're used to coming up with stuff. They're used to, like, being put on the spot and thinking of things. If they're a video game player and they're used to talent trees and these are my spells that I have and these are, like, very specific prescribed abilities, then yeah, D&D or something in that vein might be something that they are more familiar with and feel more comfortable doing. So I think, like, there's definitely something to be said for, and most of us, like, as much as we all love, like, narrative and blah, 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 whatever term you want to use for them games now, most of us started with D&D. I started with D&D. Yeah. So it's like, it's hard for us now to, like, go back to that place. And I don't know if I would have been as, I don't know how I would have reacted if PBT had been the first thing that somebody had thrown at me. Even with all my years of doing Ren Fair and improv and stuff like that, I think I still would have been like, I'm not exactly sure what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like kids might do really well with that, like, because they're still in that place where, like, pretend is real in a lot of ways. I mean, depending on the kids. But I think there is definitely something to be said for having, I don't know. I feel like I'm torn because I can, like, make the case either way.
Yeah. PBTA feels to me, it's such a paradoxical thing because it is a much more rules light system, but it also almost requires you to already understand the nuances of role-playing games before you get into the rule, like, because you're kind of like, you're filling in the gaps yourself of what the system's not doing. And like I said, I didn't start with D&D. I started with World of Darkness, which is very similar.
Yeah.
In the 90s, that was, like, the big game to play.
Yeah.
And I didn't like D&D because there was no role-playing amongst the D&D players I
Yes.
knew. Everyone who played D&D that I knew, I'm not saying everybody had the situation, but in the 90s, like, 3rd edition, 3.5, moving on from there, it was all very video game. It was always very just crunch, and it was just grinding through dungeons and whatever. And it was always the debate of role players with 2 L's or LE.
Yeah.
And I was a role player role playing, and there was role playing with dice. And it wasn't really until 5e that I felt like there was a space for me in D&D. And now I love D&D. But, like, I'm one of the few people who still is very, like, I know everyone is, like, turning on D&D, but despite a lot of the very known flaws, I still love D&D because I've been able to find so many fun ways to tell stories with it.
Yeah.
But
It's interesting. There's a lot of women I know who joined the hobby because of the World of Darkness games. Like that was something that, especially like in the '90s, was like something that brought in a huge number of non-men into the hobby because it was just a whole new thing that appealed to them in a different way. And I think it was something they could engage with that didn't already have like these decades of like grognard tradition or like people who've been like, this is how we do it. So I think it was able to be an avenue for a whole new type of player to the community.
I think you're right because I think, and I will let Bill talk at some point, but I think you're right because I know that what got me into playing D&D was a lot of the really fun, like, actual plays that I was watching where people were having a lot of goofs and playing around and having a fun, and it became much more of like, oh, this is like just a way to like hang out with your friends and make jokes and stuff like that. And, you know, and I was like, wow, you can do a lot with D&D that I didn't think you could do.
Yeah.
And it was how I had always played World of Darkness, whereas everyone I knew who played D&D was like super intense about it and like, you know.
I mean, I played D&D. I'm old enough to where, you know, there was like, I don't know, 4 role-playing games and dice were carved out of stones.
Yeah.
But
I mean, they still do that. They just charge more for it.
I know now they're like super expensive. Back then, we just went out, you know, in the quarry and did our own. But I mean, so you know, I was playing second edition, and like literally, it was like that. I think Ardwin was available, then Traveler, and there's probably a couple other things. But you know, I grew up playing D&D. And, you know, a bunch of 12-year-olds sitting around. And the thing that was really helpful is going back and looking at it, it's like, oh my God, all these tables and like everything that's there, is that you didn't have to try to figure out what to do, even as kind of messy and, you know, now looking on it, not well organized it was, you could go and find that, oh, okay, here's the thing you do. Oh, here's the number you have to roll, right? So that actually, those guardrails and guidelines like really help. And then once you get a level of mastery over that, then you realize you can start expressing yourself. And I think that tends to come with people coming in and saying, oh, can I do this? It's always a question. They start by going, I can do these things. And you learn to do those things. And you're like, oh, well, can I do this? And hopefully you have a GM or a DM that's saying like, we'll figure out how to do that. And by the way, don't ask me. Just tell me what you want to do.
Yeah.
Right. We'll figure it out. And then like
that's how easy you run as a GM.
Yeah. And then like that's the next step as a player that you're like, oh, I'm just gonna say what I want to do. I found that this morning, even as long as I've been playing, I was playing a D&D game, and I had this idea of what I want to do with my character, and I started asking the DM. I was like, so if I wanted to just go, okay, wait. Here's what I want to do. And I just realized, like, I didn't stop myself. Like, why am I asking if I can do it? I'm just going to say this is what I want to do, and then we'll figure out not whether it's potentially even possible, like how hard it is. And I think that the thing that is beneficial about having a crunchier system, and there's obviously way more crunchy systems than D&D, right? I've played my fair share of GURPS and champions, and you know, there's a lot of like way more numbers intense games. Is that once you have a mastery over that mechanical aspect of the system, and you're playing with a DM that has that, you start saying, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm going to do. And then you can figure out the way to do that, right? Now, I have to admit, as a game designer, then I like that aspect of it. Like, ooh, how do I figure out within the context of the rules? How do I move this like 3-dimensional cube around like, there's the solution. That's how we're going to do that. And I gain a level of satisfaction from that. I think, and it's interesting, you brought up a great point, Kimmy, like, what would it have been like if when I was 12, I was starting with PBTA? Right? If like Masks was the first thing I was playing or something, right? Like how would that have changed my mindset? I mean, I do tons of role playing. The mechanics, and Elspeth says this all the time. I play a ton of systems with her, and she'll say like, she's like, I don't really care about the rules. Like, I'm about the characters and the story arc. And if I get to a point I want to do something, if I'm GMing, she's like, oh, you're just gonna tell me what I need to roll, and I'm like, perfect, right? Because that's what it should be about. But it's interesting. I think I have a very different approach to role playing and storytelling because I grew up in very crunchy systems. And so I kind of had to learn, this. It was easier to get into because it wasn't like, what do I do? I don't know, because I didn't have the tools to role play as well as probably you would want to or potentially need to get like the most out of, for example, a Powered by the Apocalypse game.
Yeah.
But a lot of that was because it was a bunch of kids sitting around like, oh, we're all going to play.
Yeah.
So no one was there to guide us to say like, oh no, do what you don't ask. Like, just tell me and we'll figure out. Like, no, there was no guiding hand for that. So I actually think in that way, it was really good to come up with that kind of like mechanics heavy guardrails to go on to until my role-playing ability matured.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I think also a thing you said that really sticks out to me is about that aspect of, I stopped asking if I can do things and just started saying what I did, and my DM would say, okay, roll and I'll tell you what happens. Because I think that's really the most important thing to entry level for players is a DM who is prepared, or GM, depending on the system you're playing, or whatever system, is a game master or game whatever who is actively listening to people to struggle and know what to do to adjust to it. Because I think that's going to be what makes or breaks it. I think that someone who is like really set in their ways and can't adapt to the things that a new player is going to deal with is a problem. And I've been snapped at by a GM before for going, okay, I'm going to do this now, and then wanting to roll for it. And I remember having a guy being like, don't tell me what you're going to do. You ask me if you can roll for something, and then I'll tell you. And it was such a weird thing. I was like, I don't like playing this way. And like, this is weird. Because like, I was like, yeah, you can tell me if it succeeds or fails, but I'm still going to try it. Because that's what my character's going to do. And that's always like a frustrating thing. And I think that can be maybe what makes or breaks. I think like being in a system, especially when you're learning a new system, if you're looking to your GM for guidance and not feeling like you're getting it, that can be a thing that makes you feel frustrated and spinning your wheels. I had never played Kids on Brooms or Kids on Bikes until we played it for Hexbreakers, and I had played Kids on Bikes like the weekend before we started playing Hexbreakers. So I had to do it for two different things. And I remember like really having a hard time with the system at first because a lot of it is just like, what's in your backpack? I'm like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Like, what does it mean, what's in your backpack? Like, that kind of thing. And so many times when we were sitting at the table here, and it's like, well, I want to do this thing. Okay, well, what spell do you think that would be for? And I'm like, what magic school would you use to cast that spell?
Yeah.
And I'm like, why isn't it telling me that information? Like, that way I know what my character would have studied and what she would have learned.
Yeah.
And there is a freedom to that. There is a freedom to being able to go, oh, well, she would use charm magic for this, even though somebody else might use fight magic for this or something like that. So there is a freedom to that. But I had another random thought about PBTA, which is the one thing I will say about it as a good entry for new players is the barrier to entry for PBTA is way, way less because literally if you absolutely have to, you can open up a board game in your house and grab the dice from the board game, and now you've got all the dice you need to play that game. Yeah. Whereas any other, like most other, not any other, any non-D6 system, you have to buy special dice just to play your game. Yeah. Whereas with PBTA games, you can just go on the internet, look up some rules, grab 2 dice, and you're ready. Yeah. Basically, like, this is literally all you need to play PBTA games. Even that you can use a roller, but then again, that negates my original. Never mind.
I want to comment what you're saying a second ago about Hexbreakers, because I had that sort of similar experience. And I'd played Kids on Brooms before, and Spencer's friend of the show, and super fun. But I kept, and I don't know if it was because it was an AP. I don't know if I would have felt this way at the table. But even with, like, as much as I love rules-like games and, like, creative games, like, I sometimes felt like I was cheating. Yeah. When it was like, okay, what would you use? Well, I would use the one I'm good at. Like you're sitting there and you're like, is this wrong? Like, I feel like I can, I'm the gifted kid who got questions wrong because I could like legitimize multiple, like I could like, oh, this makes sense. And if I think about it this way, this makes sense. And so you always like validate all the wrong answers and so you miss them. But so I could sit there and like argue with myself about which school of magic was best. And I'd be like, well, I feel like if I'm arguing for the one that I'm good at, I'm cheating.
Yeah, I know that feeling exactly.
Yeah, so I'm like, I don't know if I would have felt that if it wasn't an AP. I don't remember feeling that when the last time I played wasn't an AP, but I also like, I don't remember super a lot of it. So there's that vibe too, where if it's not super prescribed, am I like inadvertently being a narrative min-maxer. Like it's like this.
Ooh, that's a good term. I love that. I feel that. I mean, I've only played like maybe 2 or 3 one-shots in PBTA, and it's done 2 things. One, it's maybe like I really want to play in a longer form with this and like explore a character and opening up new parts of of books and things like that, right? But I had the exact same thing. I was like, oh, how do I do that? I'm like, oh, well, what am I really good at? What's my best role? Right? Okay. How would I justify using that to achieve things? Okay, that's the way we do it. And there's a part of me that recognizes that's kind of the system, right? But the 2 things that gave me pause about it. One is exactly what you said. I'm like, oh, am I just min-maxing because I could be a good storyteller and talk my way through this? And like, sure, I should get the +2, not the -1. But the other thing is, for better or worse, to me, it also felt like it put the onus on the player to make a choice to explore not being able to do something good as their character. Right. So you have to have, I think, a lot of times like a pretty mature role player, someone who's like, oh, I'm going to do a thing that like I know I'm not good at, or I know I'm probably going to fail at because I think it'd be good for the story. That's a certain level of someone who's got a lot of experience role playing and sees how that actually positively can drive a full story along. I think a lot of people would be like, oh, yeah, how do I think I can get a +1 or +2 like all the time because I'll just like always lean into these things.
Yeah.
And I think that has the potential to do the overall story that you're all building together kind of a disservice. Which is what I like about systems where it's like, as however you want to think about it, but if I'm playing a system that has, specific roles and skills, and they're like, okay, everybody make a dexterity saving roll. They're not like all, hey, the building's toppling. What do you do to get out of it? And I kind of choose.
Yeah.
Right? It's like all, oh, no, this is a thing where like you have to be nimble to get out of the way. Boy, too bad I'm a big, slow, clunky doof. Okay. Yep, I get crushed by a brick or something, right? Like I like the fact that you can do that because I think also for the mature role player in those systems, you always have the opportunity, I think at least, to just choose to not succeed.
Yes.
That happened in our game this morning. One of the players, the other player was at the table, was like, I don't want to win this competition. It was down to me and him at the end. And he's like, I don't want to win because if I do, then I'm going to get way too much notice about me. And I think some people are eyeballing me. So he like speaks into my head and he's like, look, I know competition's a really big thing for you. And I'm telling you, I'm going to throw this because like, which he knew was a big risk because that could really piss me off.
Yeah.
Right. So I basically was like, didn't say anything, went and just did like a ridiculous attack where like, okay, well then, I get, I can always choose to do non-lethal damage, but you don't throw it if I actually knock you unconscious, right? It was kind of the idea, but it was great. I didn't, but there was an element where you could get knocked off of a thing or knocked out of the ring, right?
Yeah.
And so he had to make a dex saving throw to not have that happen. He's like, oh, I just fail it.
Yeah.
And the great thing is our GM said, it's like, great, make a performance check.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, did you sell it?
Yeah,
Right?
because it's like, I want to do a thing. Like, I want my character to do this, but it's like, okay, well, now that's what he's trying to do.
Right. So he's like,
I'm
I'm
going
gonna
skill check and see how well you fail.
Right. Yeah. Like, I'm gonna fail this. I'm not gonna make my dex check, or I'm gonna fall out. He's like, okay, make a performance check. Like, is everyone gonna believe that happened, or are they gonna be like, hey, did that guy just throw that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my god, what a great new thing.
There's a whole storyline.
Right.
there,
That could be a whole new storyline. But again, based on like now. You had a lot of agency in that, but there's still going to be some random potential element to it,
Yeah.
right? That
I
because
think-
So I'm sorry. I want to say like because if you were bad, and I'll shut up. If you were trying to do that, and then you weren't a good actor,
Yeah.
right? People would be like, oh, why did that guy just
Yeah,
throw
throw
that
the
whole
thing.
fight? What's going
Yeah.
on, right? Regardless of what you want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do-
Oh,
oh.
sorry. Go ahead.
I think like regarding PBTA specifically, because we keep bringing it up. I
Well,
think
there's reference to the art.
Well, no, for sure. But I think one of the things we need to kind of specify too is like we talk about PBTA like it's a monolith, but there are so many different hacks of it, and some are so well done and some are not well done. So I think like it's easy when you're talking about D&D or The One Ring or Mongoose Traveler. Like these are things like standalone things that have a set of rules. PBTA, you've got to talk a little bit more specific because like masks is something that like the playbooks are designed to push people to do things they're not good at, or to react like a teenager when they, and lose their cool and things like that. So it introduces, even if you're not a super seasoned role player, like it has a very clear path for you to have complicated, fun stories without you having to choose always to fail. It's fun if you choose to fail, but you don't have to. It holds your hand down that path. Well, there's a lot of PBTA games that don't, where it's very easy to, just be like the narrative min-maxer and always do the thing you're always good at.
Yeah.
So, I think kind of, I just wanted to point that out because I think that's something that's important because, I think that there are some PBTA games that might be good, especially if someone's like super into like Teen Titans or something. Like the cool thing about introducing players with PBTA is you can find a flavor that they are very, very familiar with and like know a lot about. So it feels very, very comfortable for them. And so like as they're jumping in, they know the vibe of the game, even if they're not sure of the rules. So that is like, again, I don't think there's a right answer to this question, but like I was arguing for rules earlier, so now I'm gonna like argue for like more rules light systems. I don't know, the tally marks and the like pros and cons lists, like how you make life choices. Sorry, Riley, what were you gonna say?
Well, I was to what you just said about rules versus rules light. I think it goes back to what I said before about having a GM who is passionate about teaching new players games, because I think that no matter how crunchy a system is, a good GM can make it less crunchy in order to introduce new players to things. Like that's what I always try to do when I'm running a game, even with D&D, when I'm running a game for new people, I treat the first several levels especially as very fluid. Like I've always given players the ability, if we start at level 1, when we get to level 3, I go, okay, what are some stats you are not glad you took? Let's remake those character sheets. Let's make your character sheet you were happy with. I do that kind of stuff. And yeah, I also like mentioning all the charts in D&D tell you how to do stuff, but one of the gags about D&D is how many rules nobody uses in D&D. Like, I've never played a D&D game where we actually used encumbrance. Like, we just don't do it. It's like the first thing I do in Skyrim is find ways to make things lighter to carry.
Yeah.
Like, that's the first hack I got when they let you mod Skyrim was the infinite carry hack. Because it's like, but if you want to play like Icewind Dale or something where that actually comes into play, suddenly like, okay, we've made the choice to lean into this. And the thing I'll say about that point you made about PBTA is perfect, about how it really depends on which PBTA version you're using. Because let's say I really like stories about monsters. Monster of the Week is a very different game than Monster Hearts.
Yes.
And you better know which one you're getting into. And I would say like that's also a good example too, because certain PBTA games are really great at the very specific thing they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And if you want to play a game that goes outside of those parameters, you will have a miserable time.
Yeah.
Like we tried to play, I did my friend has a romance podcast that's all about like romance movies and rom-coms. And for the anniversary, we played Warmer in Winter, which is a PBTA game that is designed to be like a cozy Hallmark movie style romance kind of film.
I've seen that one. Okay, yeah.
And it's very cute and very fun.
Yeah.
And I was playing with like two people who had never played a role-playing game before, and myself and another person, and no one really understood how to play it. And so everyone was playing it like you would play a board game where everyone just took their turn, and now it's your turn, and now it's your turn, and now it's your... We played the entire game like we were in initiative order, which meant that we kept like, okay, now you make a move, and you tug on their heartstrings and stuff like that, and we quickly moved out of the realm of trying to flirt with each other, and like there was like a whole thing about Bigfoot and stuff like that, and like none of that works in that system. And again, if all you want to play is like a cozy, cute rom-com kind of story, it's great. If you want to play anything that goes outside of that, you're trying to save the town.
Right.
You're stuck. And so I think that's a really good point you made about PBTA.
A busy businesswoman comes back to the hometown she grew
That's
up
what I
in
played?
and meets a cryptozoological Bigfoot.
I played like the older, she and her husband had moved back to the town. Her husband passed away, and now she was gay. That was mine.
Oh my god, I love these movies. Like I hate them, but I watch them every season, like a ridiculous amount.
Right.
Oh my god, and they're all the same, and I love that I can just like sort of zone out and still know exactly what's happening. And Sam and I will watch them together, and we'll like make bets as we go, like for what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
There's and I can't remember it, and maybe someone who's in the chat will tell us, or one of you will remember. But there was like some Netflix films that started coming out where they started building like a rom-com universe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like the same
Yeah, the
characters.
princess
The
switch.
prince.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Christmas
oh
one.
my
Chris-
god,
yeah.
that's
The prince.
genius.
What's the prince one?
Yeah. Which, I was gonna say, by the way, this before I forget, I mean, we went on another topic. I wanted to, because I was gonna reply to you, and then Kimmy talked, and I got distracted because my brain works that way.
Yeah, same.
Your point about being okay with failure and like learning to like do things you're not good at, I think that's like a really good thing to learn. And I think like there are some systems where even if you're not like a first time player but you're a new player, I think like for example, I think one of the best games that I ever played that taught me that lesson was 10 Candles.
Yeah.
Because 10 Candles opens with everyone in the story is going to die.
Yeah.
There is no way to win this game.
Yeah.
This game is doomed from the beginning. What are you going to do with the time you have knowing that information? And I think that like maybe giving players game like if you're trying to get somebody into TTRPGs and they have an open mind, it might be worth being like, okay, well, we're going to play this. We're also going to play this. Like, let's find works for you. But I think that like as far as if you're trying to level up as a player,
Right.
I think like looking for games that kind of force you to do things you're less comfortable with but you want to be comfortable with is a really good way to do that.
And to tag onto that, so it's to mix the like really crunchy with encouraging role play and like even rewarding failure. So the RuneQuest games, which are super crunchy,
Yeah.
everything is percentized and everything. However, at the end of each session, right, you get to roll against whether you get to roll to see if you increase your skill,
Yeah.
right, and you get to roll whether you succeeded or whether you failed.
Yeah.
Right. So failing still gives you a benefit, right? And if you like critically fail, you get like 2 rolls. It actually weights it really nicely in that way.
Yeah.
And the thing I liked about that, I had a chance to play some of this right before the pandemic, in a campaign was, which I thought was really cool, is that if you're not good at something, it's much easier to get better at it because you have to roll percentile dice above how well you know it. So if I only know something at a 13%, 14 or higher, I'm gaining points. I'm getting skill points. So the more higher expertise you actually have at it, the harder it is for you to learn something more.
Yeah.
So it encourages you mechanically to try stuff you're not very good at that you'll probably fail because it's the only way you get better. That's the
Interesting.
other thing I liked about a couple of the PPTA games I played. And I realized I've actually run a campaign because I forgot Monster of the Week
Yeah.
was PPTA, and I ran one of those like a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
for
you did.
12 or 13 sessions.
Yeah.
Right? Just a home game. But is that it also, in many of the I don't know what the actual thing is, like the post-action reports or your, or even your playbooks, it'll say, did you fail at a thing?
Yeah.
Right? And where failure nets you experience points, right? You
Yeah,
learn,
in Monster of the Week, you get experience
Right.
points for failing. So
right.
the game actually
Most
gives
of
you,
those, most of those do that, right? Oh, you failed, okay, make sure you're taking a
Yeah.
point. Because then it's like, oh, failing isn't always bad.
Yeah.
There's a mechanical positive to reinforce that. And I think that's the thing that as GMs we need to do is always make sure that if somebody wants to try something, let them do it, figure out how to make that happen. And then if it doesn't work, like don't make it just an absolute negative. Have there be,
Or worse, nothing happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or-
Oh yeah. That's
I
Yeah,
would
man.
also say, not to keep talking about the one show that Kimmy and I did together, but Hexbreakers is a
was a
great
good show.
example of. I played Starscape with you, so
Yeah.
and Nekama. You're great. Anyway, Hexbreakers is a great example of what can happen when you fail. Like I think treating failure
Wow,
as
did we fail?
the
all the time.
the characters fail. That doesn't mean the players fail the story.
Yes.
Right.
Like a failure is still yes-anding the story, and I think once players learn that, I know we're way off the topic of the question now, but whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Once
No,
the
I think
players learn that, I think it changes roleplay because Hexbreaker is a great example because in our second episode, Kimmy and I failed over and over and over again.
roll.
And every roll.
The dice hated
and
us.
It was gonna be like maybe an hour-long game because it was just the two of us and Adam and Joey wasn't playing yet, so it was
Jay.
Yeah, Jay wasn't here yet. They were both missing, and we were playing online, and I can't remember. Anyway,
Yeah, there was like a COVID exposure, so we had to do
yeah, someone was traveling. Anyway, the more important thing is we failed every roll,
Yeah.
and it was for like an hour.
Yeah.
But because of that, a whole second act of that session happened because. We basically like if we had succeeded our roles, we were going to go talk to the Sasquatch. There's a lot of Sasquatches in my role playing games. It turns out, we had to go talk to a groundskeeper to get permission to go steal a tear from a unicorn.
I remember
And
that.
If,
I remember
if
that
we
episode.
had passed our rolls, we would have gotten a tear from a unicorn. That would have been the end of the story.
Yeah.
Because we failed so badly, we actually made the Sasquatches turn all the alerts as high up as possible, and we had to go to a separate location to find information. Because that location, we were attacked by a hexbreaker. Kimi's character hacked reality.
Yeah.
Our characters became a love interest for each other. We had been enemies at the start of that episode, and then we became girlfriends by the end of the season because of that one episode.
Yeah.
And it's a great example
Yeah.
of how one mistake, another mistake, but the story still gets yes-anded. The story is still being built, and we're all telling the story together, even if the character fails the role.
Yeah.
You know.
And I feel like what we've like distilled, which I don't know, might have been like too simplified, but I feel like maybe fucking system doesn't matter. Like I feel like it's like the GM.
I think it does matter, but I think there's not one answer to that question.
Right. Well, I feel like it matters in as like what is the GM like comfortable running in a way that is friendly for new people. Because like depending on what you like, if you know D&D super well or you're comfortable doing D&D, you're going to have like a more pleasant experience, and you're going to give a more pleasant experience to a new player than if you are unsure, or if it's something you don't really like but you're doing it because you think it's better for new players or things like that. I feel like that might be the big key.
Yeah.
Like do what you like doing so that you give a fun experience to someone new, because if you're, I think showing people what you love is always going to be the key.
Yeah.
And I think most of us got into the hobby through curiosity and through like having fun experience or hearing about fun experiences and like wanting to be part of that. So
Yeah, I agree with that.
The one little tiny thing I've been throwing, because there was the second part of the question.
P.S.
We've been a lot on this.
Yes.
Right, which is great, because thank you for this email, obviously. It's generated tons of thought. Was the players of newer players freezing up from a decision paralysis when it comes to turn, or ultimately looking at their character sheet, seeing a skill or ability and having that result in a great role-playing moment.
Yeah.
It wasn't a new player, but I remember we were at a con doing a one-shot. Tyler was running it. In the game for some reason, before maybe we like really cared about, let's get more people playing Happy Jacks games. It was like Bruce Casey and I were all in the same game with Tyler running it. So I don't know, maybe there was some other non-Happy Jacks people there, who knows. But we came and we had these, I want to say it was like kind of like mid-level characters. We're all looking at our sheets, and there's this
What system?
demon. It might have been D&D, but I don't remember. It kind of doesn't matter, which is the beautiful part,
good.
right? For the story, it doesn't matter. But we're all looking at our character sheets. There's tons of information, like I'm going to do spells, and we have to go into this abandoned mansion, and there's this demon that we have to go and maybe exercise, or what are we going to do with this thing? Because it's going to come into the town after this guy, right? We're like, okay, go. And I think it might have been Bruce, who was like, looks at she's like, can we just like bring the like room down? like nothing to do with, like, he's like what's it gonna work? He's like, and so basically he's like, can we just like seal it, like bring this kind of cave in and seal this thing in? And Tyler's like, yeah. And so we did, which really had nothing to even do. It was on the sheet, right? But this was like after like tons of analysis. We're all experienced gamers. Like, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna do this? And Bruce is like, oh, well, we just want to do this. And I'm not kidding you. Like Tyler did that. And he was like, okay, well, yeah. And like just crumpled up the sheet for like this whole encounter. Like the boss of the thing is like, all right, yeah, great. So you guys can go back to the bar and get your thing. We're like, oh, awesome. So it's like, so sometimes even if you go through, like, you're going to look at the sheet and it's sometimes going to inspire you.
Yeah.
But that, I honestly feel like Bruce got inspired by analysis paralysis. He was like, there's so much stuff on here. Yeah. There's so many things. What could I do? Is this going to work? Is that going to work? How powerful is it? What kind of demon is it?
It's the role-playing version of Indiana Jones just pulling his gun out and shooting the guy with a sword.
Yeah. It was like, or what if I just do this thing? Yeah. Right? I mean, I think we've all sat around tables with people, especially that are playing wizards, that have like super long, or anybody has like skills, like skill monkeys, and you're just like, oh my god, and you get to their turn, they're like, and trying to figure it out. And it's like, oh, okay. Like,
I've been that, and that's honestly one of the things that still is hard for me with D&D. I played D&D 5e a bunch, and I mean, because of like my neurodiversity, I have trouble like retaining the minutia of rules.
Yeah.
So like every time I play D&D 5e, I have to kind of relearn how to do it.
mhm.
So it's like, okay, like I know the basics, obviously, but like, okay, this is exactly how these work. This is exactly how these powers work. And I'm just not someone who can, like jump in on, oh, well, I think that this specific spell, oh man, I love how they've redone it since that edition. Like, that's not something I am capable of retaining for any length of period of time, unless I'm actively doing it every day. So that was something when I first started playing D&D, that like there were no APs, so that was great.
Yeah.
And I know that especially like I when our L5R campaigns, like our first one, we played it and we jumped in the second one was the beta, but then we jumped into the third one like years later, playing like the Descendants and all that stuff, and or even one of the people, like even in that first campaign, it went on for quite some time, like 30, like we played it for a couple of years, and like sometimes there'd be a couple months between us doing sessions because like real life, and it was like a podcast thing, so like we were super chill back then. I wasn't in charge of the schedule. But and and people like would write in like, hey, why can't Kimmy like we've been playing this campaign for like a year. It's like, yeah, but it's been like 3 months since we played last time, and I really like I have to have the rules written down and I have to reference them. So I can see why, and I feel for people who feel intimidated, because every time I play stuff like that, I'm a little intimidated.
Yeah.
I'm running One Ring on Monday.
What I always try to tell people in that situation is like, yeah, you're gonna have people who email or are jerks about it, but overall, like, I have said to people that I used to get so intimidated by the amount of rules that are in D&D, for example, but I've yet to be at a D&D table where no one had to stop and say, here's the rules. And I found that something that people love as much as they love playing D&D is fighting over D&D rules. And I will say that also, like, a very popular streaming show that is maybe the most famous D&D thing on the planet anymore, I have literally seen episodes of their show where they stop and check a rule, and the guy running that show. So it's like there's a certain point where there's a freedom to the amount of rules being overwhelming, because you can go, sometimes you screw it up, asterisk. This game has an asterisk on it, whatever. Let's move on and have fun with it. My answer to your question about players learning abilities that they have that result in good role-playing moments is, we had a session recently that I played, and one of our players we were fighting a hag and a night hag, and we were in this scene, and her character was playing her character very well. She was playing her character very cowardly. So her character wasn't really fighting. She was trying to bust the door open so we could get out. And it was a good role play, because it was like, she actually is giving us an escape route, but in character, it was still her, because she didn't really know how to do all the spells she needed to do and stuff like that. So she was like, I'll find a thing that I can do this whole time so it's effective. And it was in character, it was great. And I was playing kind of a tanky cleric, so I was kind of like taking all the damage or whatever and fighting. And then the creature went over to attack her, and she looked at her sheet, and for the first time she realized the rule in D&D of the offhand, you can make a bonus attack with it. So she attacked with a sword, and then she was like, oh wait, can I make a second attack with my dagger? And the DM was like, yeah, you just roll it without the modifier. And she rolled a natural 20 and killed the bad guy. Like, she literally rolled, and it was like the greatest, and it was such a fun thing, because she'd been playing the character as so cowardly the whole time. But still a good example of, like, it actually helped the story. It wasn't like a problem. But if you imagine the scene of this character, like, the whole time trying to break the door down, and then she comes and gets attacked, and then she just takes her dagger and is like, ah, and then kills the bad guy. It is like such a fun moment. And it was like such a celebratory thing.
It's awesome.
And my version of it, very short, when we can move on, but I was playing in a session. It was one of my first times playing a cleric. I never had banishment as a spell before, and I was playing it, and our DM had spent. We were doing an arena battle. It was in Theros, and our DM spent like an hour talking up the like monster that we were gonna fight in this arena, and literally NPC after NPC came in telling us how tough this monster was and how they've been killing everybody who's trying to fight it and stuff like that. And we get in, and I'm looking through my spells, and I'm like, am I gonna do lightning to it? Like, what am I gonna do with my spell? And then I look at banishment, And I'm like, wait a minute. They just told me this creature was pulled from the underworld and not from this plane. And it's the only thing we're fighting. We're not fighting anybody else. And I just go, can I just cast banishment? And he like stops and he makes a saving throw. And sure enough, the very first round of combat, I just bamped away the only monster that we were fighting. And I was just like, okay, so I'm just going to stand here for a minute and hold his concentration so that it never comes back.
Oh God, that's the best.
Oh man,
So funny.
I love it, and I know that vibe as like a GM. You're like, yes, you can. Damn it.
I had a player do it to me. I know we can move on, but I was running early in the pandemic. I was running a campaign for newbies, and I was running Lost Mine of Fandelver. And there was like they were in this goblin castle, and she had like looked in this like oh, it was a room full of goblins. Or there's a door, and she's like, "Can I like stealthily open the door?" And I was like, "Well, the door opens into the room, so you're asking if you can open the door into a room full of goblins without them noticing that the door to their room is opening." And she was like, "Yeah, I just want to try it and see if it works." And I was like, "It was a new campaign, new players, so I didn't want to say no."
Yeah.
So like you roll stealth for me, and I didn't make her roll a disadvantage, and I should have, but I rolled stealth, and she rolled a natural 20. And I'm like, yeah, apparently I was like, here's what happens. The second you open that door, somebody across the room drops a pan, and all the goblins look at that pan that dropped, and they don't notice the giant stone door opening as you peek in. See, it was like so funny.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Those are great moments because like those can be the moments that hook someone on TTRPGs.
Yeah,
100%.
exactly.
Like,
And those are the stories they tell. Those are the moments they remember.
Yes.
And as a GM, like when and we've all had this happen. You plan a thing like this is how it's going to go, and then like no plan survives meeting with players, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
they come up with something crazy, weird, brilliant, whatever it is, and for me, it's always the split moment of like, damn it. Like, and then I'm also like, and I'm so proud. Like, I'm so proud of my players. In our home game, in our Eberron game, I set up, there's a big story arc that Dave's character is going through. And he's basically within our campaign playing an amnesia campaign. Because his character, like, woke up with no memory, right?
Okay.
So we just got to this big moment where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do a big lore drop for Dave's character. And this all happens, and he's a Warforged, and he meets these other Warforged, and they recognize him, and his Gulra, which is he didn't have one, which is like, means he had no name. And so it appears on his forehead, and then he's like, oh man, he has these dreams. Like all this crazy shit happens. And we get to the point where there's a combat, it gets tense, stuff goes down that I did not anticipate, and I'm like, this could be a TPK. Like this could literally result in a TPK because they're outnumbered.
Yeah.
Right? Dave uses a spell that he's tried 4 times during the campaign and has never hit with Divine Strike or something. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, when the hits finally. That's
And
the
so
best feeling in the world.
he's like, okay, I'm going to use it because there's like a single combat between Tyler's character and the leader of this like 8 other Warforged. He casts the spell, nat 20.
Nice.
Yeah.
He casts the spell and he misses, and he had an inspiration. He goes, I would use inspiration.
Yes.
Nat 20. I'm like, okay, does his damage like 35 damage, right? And the enemy they were fighting only had like 8 hit points left, so it's like Dave described it's this big glorious thing that happens, and then he turns to the other Warforged and basically is like, all like, this is over, stand down. I'm like, okay, make a persuasion roll. Nat 20. But back to back. I was like, okay, so they're following you. Something in your repressed memories allowed you to issue the specific command that denotes that you are now taking command change. And because of who his character was, that Dave, now plug your ears, that he doesn't know who he was exactly.
Yeah.
It makes sense. But I then realized, like, oh my God, that was amazing. That was a fantastic moment. I'm like cheering, and I was like, oh, shit. They've got 8 Warforged now. The party have 8 Warforged. What am I going to do with that?
I do think that's actually what you just said reminds me of one thing I'll say that's like benefit to crunchier games versus less crunchy, and then we can move on.
Then we have to we're an hour in and we haven't even gotten to the second.
I know.
Now.
I'm so sorry.
It's a
This is
great,
a good question.
it's a great conversation though. I love it.
Old school, 3 hour show. Here we go.
I think
Strap
one of the
in.
good benefits of a crunchy game, if you actually do play the rules pretty hard line, is that when moments like that happen and you succeed on something when you've been failing it and like there's been no fudging it, it feels so satisfying when it
Yeah.
happens. And last point is that I do think you remember failures sometimes more fondly than you do successes,
Absolutely.
and that's why failures should be celebrated and enjoyed in games.
100%.
3 more thoughts and then we'll move on. Okay.
This is such a great topic, and you could talk about it like so much. Like, and I think it is important that we have conversations and that because getting new people into the hobby is what we all need to be doing. Like,
Yeah.
build it. All right. Do you want me to read this one, or do you want to read this one, Bill?
Do you want to be the listener about the One Rings email? I'm happy to read it if you would like to absorb.
Yeah, I'll
Bill should
absorb.
read it.
You
Yeah.
absorb. You absorb.
Yeah.
Hello, Happy Jacks crew. Long-time listener, first-time emailer.
Oh, thank you.
After listening to season 31, episode 4, I had to write in. I'm a longtime One Ring lore master, LM. I want to gush about the game and give Kimmy and the listeners some tips and encouragement to play the One Ring. I also hate the Rings of Power, despite having watched the whole thing in the same way that one can't look away from a multi-car wreck. I love the One Ring. It is by far my favorite system, due partially to my being a mega Tolkien nerd. And I think it's a great system to introduce the wide world of RPGs to D&D only players. I think it is very important that the LM actually know Tolkien quite well, because getting the most out of the system requires that someone understand the tone, moral philosophy, and style of Tolkien's stories. It's also great if the LM is familiar with the old epic poems and the style of storytelling in German, Nordic, and Celtic folklore.
All right, I'm gonna just have a lot of caffeine this weekend to take more notes. All right.
The game almost...
Neil Gaiman's Nordic folklore is pretty good, just for the mythology.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of it, but like,
Yeah.
no pressure. It's fine.
The game almost demands that you police that tone amongst the players to avoid the setting becoming D&D with hobbits instead of halflings. D&D doesn't have an absolute morality, and most players are more familiar with playing morally gray characters when that doesn't really fly in Tolkien's world. Good is good, evil is evil, and evil is never okay, even if it leads to a greater good. The shadow system really enforces that. Encountering evil beings and evil powers will leave you darkened, and every evil deed marks your soul no matter what your intentions were. Doing evil doesn't make you immediately an evil person, but the evil you commit is never acceptable, and you will suffer for it.
Mm-hmm.
Besides policing of tone and morality, I think the other big thing to focus on is the dynamic and prevalence of magic in Tolkien's world. Despite being a mythical world, magic is both common and very rare. Very few people, even elves, encounter obviously magical phenomena often. The magic of the world is very subtle. Dwarven iron and stone is grander and stronger than the stuff created by men, and elves are capable of feats that men are not. Legolas can see further, hear better, and shoot with deadly accuracy, but one of the only obvious supernatural things he does is walk on snow. The 3 wizards are the only ones capable of D&D style magic, and they very, very, very rarely use their powers. Things like mental influence, visions, whisperings, light, darkness, and stuff that don't act as it should, i.e. cold fire, are all the fare of the fairy tale magic present in Tolkien's world. Doing so consistently makes the moments where you do introduce supernatural enemies like wraiths, dragons, and banished sorcerers gifted by the power of Sauron even more impactful and wondrous. Finally, I'd say that most GM prep will tell you not to worry about the details of setting until the players interact with them. It's important to give items, people, and places a history that ties them to the greater world. Tolkien's world feels more real because it all makes sense. Even if there's no obvious reason, things that exist in Tolkien's world always have a reason to exist, even if Tolkien only wrote that reason down on a notepad. Magic swords have histories, big monsters come from somewhere, and villages don't just show up in the wilderness. This is made a lot easier if you know the lore. Giving everything a sensible history gives them a sense of place, which makes the world feel much more alive than any generic fantasy setting. Forgotten Realms. Keeping all of those things in mind, I think you'll have a great One Ring experience. Also, check out the One Ring Discord channel. I collect and publish a large collection of homebrew resources for the One Ring 2E on that channel, and you're always willing to help new players and LMs. Love you guys! Adam from California.
Awesome. Yeah, it's interesting because in a lot of ways, One Ring feels like it's much more focused on role playing than D&D, even though in some ways it feels very, very crunchy. Like combat, I haven't run it yet, but reading it and watching actual plays of it and stuff, it's like it's very different, and it might be more crunchy than D&D combat. So I'm very curious about how that kind of fits in. But as far as character creation, I like how it's more focused on like the culture that you come from and things like that. More like that kind of gives you a lot more of what you can do rather than like your skills that you learn as like whatever trade you choose, which is interesting, and it's an interesting take on it. So I don't know. I'm very very curious to see how that ends up.
I don't have a ton to say about this, which I know was rare for me. I'll probably say more than I think I will. But I do think that this goes back to what we were saying previously about what the best entry system is for you is based on what you're looking for. Because when Adam says that the reason that Adam thinks it's a great entry to the system, I don't think that I would have enjoyed role playing as much if I was playing this game for my first system than if I played. Well, I mean, obviously I played World of Darkness, but like versus D&D.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't want to go from D&D to this game, which based on what I've just from what I've read here, feels more restrictive and more a very specific type of story. I think if you very much want a Tolkien style story, this sounds amazing.
Yeah.
I think if you're, I think maybe what I like about D&D is the morally gray aspect of it. I like the ability to kind of like be a little bit more like just wild stuff happening in this world and things are happening in other places. I agree about the Forgotten Realms. Like I don't love playing D&D games set in Forgotten Realms unless the GM who's running it is just really good at building their world building out. Because for me as a GM, like I don't like using it because it feels so nebulous to me that I can't visualize it. Whereas some of the other published settings, I feel like I can immediately picture them and I can tell stories set in them. And I usually move Forgotten Realms based campaigns into other settings for that reason because like I can visualize them. That's just how my ADHD. I think Forgotten Realms has been around for so long and has been the space for so many nebulous stories that it's like Tolkien at least feels like this is what Middle Earth looks like. This is the exact history it's written down and stuff like that, so it's a little bit easier. But yeah, I think that like this seems like this email listener loves Tolkien, loves Middle Earth, loves that whole world, and so is really eager and excited to play games set in that world. And I might have the same feeling about like a really good Star Wars RPG because I can visualize and understand the Star Wars setting. Whereas like I tend to like Game of Thrones more than Tolkien because of the moral grayness of it. But even Game of Thrones, I don't know if I want to play a long campaign set in that world because the magic of that world's a little bit too muted for me. And part of why I want to play high fantasy games is I want to get magic. You know, I always want to cast spells and do magic stuff.
Yeah.
But I think I like the enthusiasm overall, though.
Yeah, I think the thing that was interesting is I had two thoughts reading through that. One is I'll be interested. One, I'm excited to hear you run something. I always am, Kimmy. Two, I'm going to be interested in that to see if this made me think about it reading this. Is the setting going to be? Does it get too imposing and too restrictive on the players where they're like, you know, oh, no, you can't do that, or you wouldn't do that, or that like that's a morally gray thing, right? Where, you know, because it's interesting, you know, if everything you do, even if you do it for good, falls in the darkness, right, and it starts pulling you towards the shadow, it's like, where's my redemption arc? If I can't, is there a mechanic to pull back to the good side, or is it like, no, once you've gone down there, you're there? So is my only redemption arc, I die for like a good reason, right? Or like where does that go?
No, you can fight a Balrog of Mordor, and then you can just fall through, and then you just come back as a white wizard later.
Right. You can't get gray, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Like then just like whoop whoop.
Yeah.
And, okay, good. So fine, handled the lore. Got it.
Yeah.
I will say, even I was a little intimidated by the. It's also great if you remember the old epic poems in the style of storytelling in German, Nordic, and Celtic folklore. I'm like, oh, woo, all right. Like I would imagine, because I get a feeling that Adam is these things, right? And not braggy way, just like, oh, hey, this has really helped me. Like, I feel like I might really love exploring with all that knowledge and background. Like some things I'm very familiar with, some I'm a little familiar with. But the stuff about setting in here, talking about like how magic is handled, and then when you were talking about magic, it made me think like when I was running the Eberron game right now. I chose Eberron really specifically. So I was looking like, well, I want to run a D&D thing because people want to play D&D, which is awesome. I want to do that. And one of the things that really intrigued me about Eberron is that it is magic is common. Magic's like everywhere.
It's electricity, basically.
Yeah.
But high level magic is rare. Right? You just don't have people running around throwing like teleport and like 8th and 9th level spells, like no one gets there. Like it's super, super rare. So it lets me explore and with the players build this world where it's like, there's just like magic stuff happening all the time. It's super easy, right? You can get it. Oh yeah, I come in cleansing stone, everybody's clean. There's like the guild hall that they stay in, like the fireplace is just always going.
Yeah.
It's like, because it's permanently going. Why wouldn't it be? Like, you want to have a nice fire going. Why would you do that? Right? So, like, those things are there, but big things, right, are still very aspirational. So even in a setting where magic is commonplace, to do something, like, really big is a huge deal, right? And it is a very it's a great setting. It is the kind of thing where I read it and I was like, oh, I get it. I can see stuff. I know how things are gonna, like, I know how it looks. I can describe that. People are gonna grok it immediately. I think that is a benefit for One Ring, I would imagine, as well, because if you've read all the books, you at least have your mindset about what it looks like. There have been gorgeous films that have been done. Whether you think Rings of Power is a great show or a shite show, it's gorgeous, right? Like there's been and the paintings over the years that have been done about the settings. Like I can immediately visualize like what places look like.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge benefit for the players
Yeah.
and the GM to be able to say, "You're here." You start describing it, feel like, "Oh yeah, I can totally see it. I can see all of it in my head." And I think that's great. I'll be really interested to see about the characters, only because I'm if I can get my damn internet to work, I'm doing the intro, and so I have a little insight as to the characters and stuff. I'm like, oh my god, this is gonna be so cool.
It's gonna be interesting.
Yeah.
I do find like the system is designed to run a very specific type of game, and it's not a story of like redemption so much, because Tolkien doesn't really tell redemption stories very often. It's more about hope and despair. And even though he never would admit it, it was very much informed by his experiences in World War I and things like that. So
he insists it's not, but it very much is.
I mean, you can't create art that doesn't draw from your experiences. So he may not have like planned that in mind, but it was definitely like part of the DNA is there because it was something very formative in his life. So like that's more the story. So as they're battling with the shadow and stuff, as far as the mechanics, hope is the big thing that you don't want to lose, because it's more about like those moments where like Frodo like was like, I don't know if I can do this, and like
I can carry you.
Yeah, exactly. Those are like the moments that it's very clearly meant to distill. The interesting thing about it,
that brought me back immediately. I was like, oh god,
Everybody
I watched all
needs a
the
Sam.
Jackson films before the show started, and I was like, I forgot how good all these are. Yeah.
Let's see. It's so cool.
I would say coming in.
sorry.
Finish your thought, and then I'll say a thought.
Okay, so that's more like the story that it's very clear to tell. And unlike a lot of systems, like it wants you to interact with the big important characters. It's like you are in the Shire. Well, not the Shire. You're in Eriador, which is the Shire is part of that area. And it's like the party has to choose a patron, not a Patreon. It's saying that too much. A patron who like is someone who they keep coming back to. And like the book has a chart of a list of them, and it's Galadriel and Gandalf and Bilbo. It's like they want you to go talk to these people.
Why would anyone not pick Galadriel if you had the option?
Yeah, I didn't. I made it my own.
Okay, that's
yeah. I mean,
I guess
a person from the lore, not the books.
Is it Tom Bombadil?
No, but he was on the chart too,
Oh,
and so was
really?
Bullberry.
Nice.
But no, but I picked someone not on the chart, and like someone who's technically not even in any of the books, but we'll see. They're in the notes. So because I wanted that freedom, like I wanted to.
Phileas footnote.
Is it Eowyn who's not in the book?
No,
She's in the book. Yeah.
she's yeah, but like I didn't like being tied to the lore that tightly, to the really common known lore. So I wanted someone who is still canon, and but someone that there's not so much written about that I could like make like add some stuff to, or like there's a very loose outline of this person. So I'm just like, there's big gaps. I'm going to fill this in with other things that can like drive the story in certain directions. Because that's something that really appeals to me. I love Tolkien. I don't want to reenact The Hobbit or The Fellowship of the Ring, which is kind of what the system seems like it wants you to do.
Yeah.
So I want to play in that world, not in that story. So I'm hoping that by changing who the patron is, and we made up like our own town and stuff. We built it with Decima. It's still very much in the flavor of Tolkien, and it technically, while it may not be in a map, nobody said it didn't exist, and that sort of thing. So I think that is something that's much more appealing to me personally as a GM, because I don't have to worry about them burning down, the prancing pony and Bree and fucking over the rest of the world because.
Yeah.
But then Aragorn can't meet them there because it burned down like 50 years before because of my players, and then like it just gives me a little bit of freedom with the canon, which I'm hoping works out well. And I'm hoping I have the chops of the knowledge of the world to like really like make that work, because you have to know something well to like play in the pool like that, I think. So
Yeah, that's what I think is the barrier for entry into a game like this, is like all the comments that are being made here about like you must know all this Tolkien lore and you must know about Germanic, Nordic, and Celtic folklore. That feels like a lot of homework for someone who might not know. But again, if you're excited about it, then you can be great with it.
Yeah.
I think if I was making a character for this system, I would probably play a hobbit.
Yeah.
Because I would probably want to pick someone who's like, oh, this is a very sheltered person who doesn't know a lot about this world and has been grown up like, I have never left past this farm.
Yeah.
Like, that's the furthest I've gone from my house is this farm. I want to take a step further. It's the furthest I've ever been in my entire life. So that anything that way I don't feel the pressure as a player to know anything about this world.
Yeah.
Even if I know things that I've picked up through osmosis from movies and books and stuff like that, I have a really hard time retaining lore for worlds. And so I think I would have to just play a character who, like, everything new is like, this is what is happening right now.
Yeah.
Like, they don't know about second breakfast? What? Like, that would be the character I'd have to play to be able to engage with a game like this.
And that's perfect because that's exactly what happened, because Jay's playing and he's only ever seen the movies a little. Like, he saw them and he's like, yeah, I watched them when they came out, or recently, I guess. I don't know. So that's like his entire like Tolkien, and he's playing a Hobbit. And then I have Kai, who speaks Sindarin and probably knows more than I do about this world. And he's just like, and he's playing an elf. And he's like, okay, so I was born like in like the turning of the second to third age and blah, blah, blah. So it's like, okay, I can. So it's interesting to like that. Like they just kind of naturally gravitated to kind of those roles, like what you said, based on kind of their knowledge. And Dave's like, I know some stuff. I'm going to be a dwarf. And so it's just very interesting how that facilitated that really naturally and really well.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest challenge for GMs, right? Is when when you make the decision that you're going to run a game or a campaign or whatever it is, but in a known setting, especially a very well-known setting, is like, okay, how am I going to do this to where I don't screw up and the players don't screw up what is already canon, what has happened, because you kind of want it around some of those things they already know, or else it's not as much of an interesting draw. That is times 100 when it's an AP, because now you've got people that are listening that, oh
my God.
God bless them, they just want to help out, but they will tell you everything that's not correct. And I mean, that was kind of, I had a little bit of that panic when I ran the Star Wars game. And I was like, I'm going to run a Star Wars thing. I'm going to purposely set it in a time where there aren't movies.
Yeah.
There is some EC, but I can kind of play around with that, right? And I'm going to have them meet one important person, but not someone that would travel with them. And it's kind of, so Palpatine was who they met, right? And they got some stuff for that. But then everything around them was like I'm going to make up some other characters around the periphery. I'm going to reference some characters. I had one character I specifically brought in that I knew died around that time. So like all the worst case scenario was like, they were the ones that did it. Awesome. I just, so like there was a lot of planning around how to do that. Because that concern is always, to your point, like, oh no, they burned down the prancing pony. Oh God, did they rebuild it in that time? What happened? How do I get things back on track for people that like, and me being one of them that care about the lore being there. Like I'm like, I can't ever have them meet Vader. Like that was my thing. Was like that won't happen.
Yeah.
So I had but Dave, of course, because Dave always comes up with these like. I think he almost always seems the character that just like pushes your game in a direction you'd expect it to go.
Yeah.
And I ran it in my skinned version of Traveler, and he made the crazy rolls through chance to become a force user, and then I was like, well, what path do you choose? And I'm thinking like, oh, he'll probably go light, he'll be a Jedi or something. Maybe it's like Sith.
Yeah.
So I'm like, shit. Okay, so the party's all.
His internet handle
yeah.
is CA
A
Sith Lord.
I know it wasn't about like I was.
Which I should have looked at Kai's, because his internet handle is it's very, very deep Tolkien lore, and I was like, oh, you're Tolkien, and then I was like making the name tag. I was like, oh, fucking.
But you know what? You
God
can
damn.
play with that because elves are kind of arrogant. I'm not saying Kai's gonna be arrogant, but if you have a character who's like, no, I know these things about the world, that can be like an elf, like a dwarf would think that. Or that
He
kind of
totally
thing.
made that character. That's amazing. I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, I'm just gonna we gotta wrap up.
Yeah,
I love it.
yeah.
But I am gonna end this with my own actually 3 wizards, Adam. 3, really? Okay, mailbag number 3. Hello, Empress Kimmy and her laser printed court. I like that laser printed court. My normal group of players have all learned to play TTRPGs with me. They were a group of people that all had never played before and learned together. They had never had another GM until a year ago. Thank you, Kimmy, for doing that, by the way. So basically, I have realized that I unintentionally built a group that revolves around me because I was learning. I thought a good group leaned into my story. So I think I kind of trained them to do that. I didn't teach them to contribute. I taught them to spectate and roll dice. More like a choose your own adventure than a TTRPG. Now, years later, I've learned that games are best when everyone contributes to the plot and narrative. The last couple of years, I've been trying to stress this to my players, but for the first 5 years, I made them ask me everything in a game. I did such a good job of picking all these emails. Like,
Amazing.
it's amazing. I totally planned that. It wasn't half planned while I was trying to watch Teletubbies with my daughter. Okay, anyway. Endgame. So clearly, some of them are having a hard time. I've been trying to invite new GMs to run one-shots for us so they can see other types of GMing styles. I've been trying to sprinkle in other games besides D&D when I can. I've been trying to ask them more questions about what is happening. While some of the players are taking to it like rock stars, others are still intensely passive. I feel like I've ruined them for a more narrative story-driven gameplay. In the end, I fear what I am. I have rarely run games for others out of my group that learned with me. And now I always feel like I'm doing, and although I always feel like I'm doing better as a GM, actually knowing if you are a good GM, in quotes, is so hard to know. My good friends that learn with me, they don't really know. The few times I have run for others outside my group, you can't expect honesty from them because they don't know me well. Anyway, sorry for the long email. That's not a long email, Verk, you know better. Filled with fear of inadequacies, but I figured that others might have similar feels. Thanks for all you do, Verk. P.S. Drink. P.P.S. Anyone want to run a one-shot for my group? Hit me up on Discord. Thank you.
First of all, I will tell you if your email is long. I'm not quiet about it.
No.
I think that we talked about this a lot already in the first email, so I don't want to like rehash too much, but I don't think you've necessarily ruined your game for your players. I think that some players just like certain kind of games in some ways. And I think what you're saying is like, oh, I'm noticing these players are more passive. That might just be how they like to play. Like, yes, I can understand your concern of like, oh, I taught them this is the only one way to do it. But the fact that some players are enjoying this more narrative approach and others aren't might just be a preference of taste. Because, like, at the end of the day, these are all people who have agency and the ability to figure out what they like for themselves. And as I mentioned earlier, when I first started playing role-playing games, I knew a lot of people who, when they played D&D, all they wanted to do was move from room to room, fighting monsters and collecting loot and not really caring about story at all. And so, you know, even saying now, like, oh, games are better when everybody contributes to the plot or narrative. I personally think that's better. I think that is a preference. I think that is still so. I wouldn't beat yourself up too much. I don't think it's that wrong for someone who, if the plus side of this is for 5 years you provided a gaming table for people who didn't have anybody else to run a table for them, and you shouldn't feel bad about that. And like, yes, you also had to learn as a GM, and you've now learned things that you like doing better as a GM, and hopefully these players will come along for it. But they're not necessarily wrong for liking the games that they like, and you're not wrong for running the games that you like, as long as you're not like steamrolling and sandbagging your players to where they're not having fun. But I'm gonna say that if people have been playing with you for 5 years, they're having fun, and you should be more happy with yourself than you think you're being in this email.
Absolutely. And having used your play group as beta testers for Starscape, thank you for that, by the way. Like, they were fun. I had a great time. Starscape is a PBTA hack that, while it has a little bit more like stuff and housekeeping than like masks, then they did a great job, and I had a great time, and they jumped all in and something. And I am so what are you doing? Like, I had zero plot plan for that game, and they just jumped in, and it was all pulled from what they contributed, and it was a super fun game. And some of them were more quiet and some of them weren't, and that's true of every single table, even Happy Jacks games. Like there are people who are more laid back and wait for their moment, and people who are jumping and pushing things forward, and people change and do a mix of those things depending on the characters and a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah, and I really resonated with me the like long email, which it wasn't, but filled with fear of inadequacies. Welcome to being a GM. Like, every GM I know, no matter how good they are and how long they've done it, have at least their moments of, was that good? Did people like that? Did I play? Oh God, I could have done that better, right?
Every time.
Like, every time. I think that imposter syndrome like lives to different degrees. I will guarantee you, because I know, like, even the dungeon master of the most popular AP that exists.
He's been on the show. We can say Matt Mercer's name.
Okay, yeah. So Matt has that. Like, I've talked with Matt where he's like, oh yeah, I think that went really well, but like, and he's got all the support in the world, like from his players, from people that watch it, from his team, like, but you always are like, is there a way I could have done that? Oh God, why didn't I do this? This would have been that would have been a 5% better beat, right? That happens.
Yeah.
You've had, to Riley's point, players for 5 years at your table. They're still there.
Yeah.
You're doing a great job.
I'll go this far. I'm not supposed to be reading the chat while we're on the stream, but it's right there.
This
I have
is a
ADHD.
show you're allowed to.
Burke, when this got read, like 5 people in this chat, if you're not in the chat right now, if you're listening to this on the podcast, like, I think like 5 people just went, this is a Verk email? Verk is an awesome GM. I played in a PvP mass game of his, so good, and one of my top gaming memories. Somebody else said, so did I had a blast in that game. Somebody else said, yeah, and then Kimmy said, yep, he is good. So people love your GMing, and I refuse to have you talk about my friend Verk, who I don't know, but I refuse to let you talk about him in such negative light.
Yeah, you're awesome. But
Having said that, it is good to go, okay, what are my shortcomings as a GM? How can I improve them? But I wouldn't beat yourself up as much as you have been.
Right. Well, and like, the imposter syndrome is real, and it's terrifying, and it messes us up all the time. Like, there are times where I'm just like in my office going, all this is a waste of time. Nobody likes anything I do. Nobody likes Happy Jacks. Nobody wants to do this. Like, this is awful. Nobody, like, well, it's a huge, like we all have those moments, and like, you just can't like let that win.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, I still enjoy it. So even if nobody ever listens to the podcast, which hopefully if you're hearing this, you are. So that's a weird, like, whole circle thing. But anyway, so, but it's like, you have to do it because you are enjoying it. Yeah. And that's been the weirdest thing with doing APs and with like making gaming like a podcast and things like that is like, and that's one of the things I really fight for with our channel and our games and stuff like that. It's like, we're playing for us. We're playing to enjoy it ourselves. We're not making choices to entertain an audience or because we think it's the best thing. Like, play and have fun ourselves, and like putting that out into the universe is a good thing. Mistakes and all, like, weird kind of, maybe it's a boring character choice, but that's the one I want to make. So cool. That's what we need to see in the hobby is like the human, like, the actual part of the actual play. Like, where it's like, valid and real life and friends sticking around at a table and having a good time and maybe drinking too much sometimes.
Yeah.
I will say, because this is the show, I can read the chat.
Yeah.
Rose made a really great point saying, you've got too much time to get into your own head. That's the problem with GMing.
Yeah.
100%.
And it's 100% true, because I even look at, in October 21st, we passed the 1 year mark for our Eberron game. I was like, oh my God, we've been playing for a year. This is crazy. We're just like, oh, hey, let's get together and play, right? And we just finished session 39, but we do a virtual tabletop, and I went and looked, and I'm like, okay, Tyler's got like 78 hours on the virtual tabletop, and then it's like Dave and Elspeth are almost tied with like 83 or whatever, and Kurt's got like 87 or something, and I have 293 hours on the
Because you're building maps.
Because I'm
and
building
Yeah.
maps, and I'm like writing lore, and I'm making items, and it's like, right, and I don't feel like I'm having to do more prep and work because I'm building maps as opposed to, here you go, and putting it down on an actual table when I want to use a map, right? Because I have to create it all digitally, and I have a learning curve for the VTT and everything. But I realized, right, I have, and as a GM, very typically, you at least start by having no one to talk to it about, because all the people that you love to like role play with are all your players, and you're like, I can't talk with them about my cool idea. I can't like be excited about my reveal or anything.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I can't tell you, and you have to try to find other GMs in the community, which is one of the things I've always loved about this show being for GMs. Is like, we can all sit around and, I bore everybody before the show starts. Like, okay, here's this thing that I have in my can, because I have no other opportunity.
Yeah, we're
right?
super bored by
Yeah,
that.
I
That's,
did-
that's
well-
why we're all like, really? Oh, that
We had nothing to
okay.
say
That's like
Yeah.
Kimmy's like, yeah, keep talking while I'm testing the microphone. It's perfect. Go ahead.
I mean, yeah, that too. But
Yeah, that too.
it's
But-
multitasking.
Yeah.
But I think that's a thing, right? It's so if I had one thing that's gonna help you, I think, Burke, is like find some other GMs you can get into like a private Discord chat with, and talk about your campaign from like a GM to GM level. Like, here's the thing I'm doing. What should do that? I found my GM on my Wednesday game, Ron. I was like, would you be okay if I bent your ear about some stuff I'm planning for my home game? Because the two people I would normally talk to them about are both playing in my game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, sure, it's great. And I found it's 90% me just blah, 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 blah. And then he's like, oh, that sounds really cool. Hey, David, what do you think about this? And he's just like prompting. I'm like, oh my God. And like all this pressure was off because I had someone to talk to about it. Right. So just like and I think it's amazing. You're like, hey, if you want to run one shots, I want them to see other GMs. I want to see other GMs.
Yeah.
That's first
It's not
of all,
you, it's me. I just think we should see other GMs.
But that's super mature.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's crazy, right? Like crazy great.
Yeah.
To be like, hey, yeah, I want my players to see other gyms, to see what other styles are like. I want to learn from that.
Yeah.
It is incredible. So you just go sit yourself down and say, you know what? I'm good enough. I'm strong enough. And, I can...
Gosh darn it, I rolled a natural 20.
There
Yes,
you go.
absolutely.
Yeah, somebody asked in the chat, and I know we have to wrap it up, but
okay.
is it less fun to be a GM than it is to be a player? I definitely think there's a more responsibility on your shoulders as a GM, but I think if you love GMing, it can actually be as fun, if not more fun, than being a player at times. If you have a passion for it, like you were talking about the hours logged in virtual tabletop. But also, that means you got to spend 200 hours in your world. Your player got to play for 2 hours a week? You got
That's
to play
right.
for 30 hours a week? How much
Yep.
more fun is
I
that?
know, yeah.
You get to have so much more fun. No, but I think that there is something to be said about being a GM, and when I'm a pantser GM, I'm not a super planner GM, and so what I do is I create the world, and I create what would have happened if the players didn't show up, and that's where I stop my planning. And then let the player, and so it can be so fun to have a player suddenly do a thing, and you're like, well, like you mentioned earlier, that plan is gone. What are we doing? There's also times where I'll be driving, and suddenly the thing that I can do that will completely screw over one of my players' characters pops in my head, and I go, oh, this is going to be very fun, and I can't wait to see their face when it happens, because we're all going to enjoy it together. And there is something very fun about that. So it's like, there's a lot of joy to GMing. It feels very stressful at times, but I think that if you love doing it, it's one of the most fun things in the world to do with gaming.
Yeah. I think it's a different type of fun, but it is very, very fun. And it was terrifying, and it's still terrifying in some ways. And you never quite get over am I doing this right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I mean, I feel like that's the case with a lot of things that are very worthwhile and amazing.
I think running games for APs helps because if you listen to them again later, because like our most recent Doctor Who episode, that was our Doctor Who Day special.
Mhm.
When we recorded it back in August, I thought it was a complete mess, and I was literally like, the whole audience is gonna stop listening to the show because the episode's gonna be so bad. I was dreading it, and then when I finally heard it in like early November, I was like, this is a really fun episode. Like because my players were so goofy and had so
Yeah.
much fun with it. I'm like, this was great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think with as a player, the fun comes from like, ooh, look at the thing I did. That's great. Mom, Dad, look what I did. Woo, I had a plan and it came off, or I did the fun, wacky thing, or like we had this serious moment or whatever. But like, it's very much. And as a GM, I'm always like, oh, look what the kids did.
Yeah,
Oh, so
yeah.
good, right? You're like the proud parent, and it is a lot of like this. The Eberron campaign is the most I have ever planned in a lot of times. But I'm not planning out like you go here plot points. A lot of it is like, oh, I want them to get to this place. Okay, I need to build that place and to make that. I need to get these relationships. I also have gone completely insane in the number of NPCs that are in this world, to my own demise many times. When I'm like, right, this is the 7th voice I need to do tonight. Boy, do I remember? I have to look at my role play note on the
Yeah.
character and my OneNote, and I'm like, oh, right, Irish accent, right? Okay, good. All right. By contrast, in the Traveler and Yuma Station, like that very much was like plot points, like here's what's gonna happen, wherever you guys take it, right? To the point where there was no BBEG in that campaign until I think episode 12 or 13, and it completely came out of something that our guest star did, that Noah did, and it was like, wow, I had no idea he was gonna do that.
Oh yeah, you talked about
And it
that.
was
Yeah.
crazy. And then I was like, and that's where we're going to end this week. and we played every other week. I'm like, I have 2 weeks to figure out how the hell that makes sense and where it goes.
Yep.
And I remember that being a 2-week scramble of listening to every episode, looking at all of my notes, and then realizing, oh, this is actually how it all comes together. And that's weird. It makes sense.
Mhm.
Right. And so then you fill it in. And the thing that I love about when you're not planning, when you're more seat of your pants and you're taking your cues from your players, which is where to me the proud parent thing comes from.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
that was so smart. That was so cool. What a crazy idea.
Yeah.
Is that you then, when you find ways to tie that up or pay that off in the aspect of a campaign, the players are so invested. 'Cause they're like, I knew that was the thing. Or they're like, oh, when we met that person, because you kind of half backfilled off of what they did. So everything they did had its level of importance, right? And that, for me, is the joy of GMing that I don't get as a player.
Yeah.
Is being able to not pull the strings, but figure out how to tie them together.
Yeah. I love like the description, like I don't know who, but somebody at some point was really smart and they were like, yeah, GMing is not about pulling strings, it's about weaving threads together. And I was just like, oh, that's
Yeah.
so awesome. And like, that's like a bumper sticker that I'd have in my car, and like 5 people who would probably become my friends because I had it on my car would like, be like, oh, I want to be your friend, you know? But yeah, no, I think that's amazing. So yeah. And you're awesome, Berg.
Yeah.
And thank you for being a mod in Discord because it's very helpful. All right. I shouldn't put that away because it has the last part of my notes on it.
Thank you for joining us
There you
for
go.
season 31, episode 6. Please visit monkeyspawgames.com to support our amazing indie designer of the month, Nora Rose. Is that how you pronounce it? Nora Rose. You had it written out earlier.
Yeah.
But you didn't have it phonetically on this side of the
I
paper,
didn't.
and that's
I'm
why
sorry.
I was
Yeah.
trying to help you out, and I made it worse.
It's okay. You did
Do
great.
you want to take over now that you have paper again?
I will. Thank you to our chat mod, James V, and to our amazing Patreons who keep us ad-free and independent. If you want to join their incredible ranks, you can go to happyjacks.org/Patreon. I'm filming a little video of like some of the studio upgrades we've been able to do because of them. So I'll
Nice.
be posting that soon. I have to figure out how to do that. And then, yeah, my name is Kimmy.
I'm Riley.
And I'm Bill.
And this week we're going to leave you with a song called Bogged Down in the Valley O by a band called the Merry Wives of Windsor. And you can find their stuff at mwow.net. And
They're on my my Spotify festival list.
oh, nice. Yes. I sing the egg verse. That's me.
I
So
know.
have fun. All right. See you all next week. Bye.